welcome back to Unseen Lines, a podcast where we examine the deeper structures shaping the lives of individuals and communities and what that means for social work and the world. I'm your host, Eliana Palmer, and today we're exploring a topic that continues to be misunderstood, minimized, and sometimes even dismissed within social work classrooms, practice, and the world, and that is anti-Semitism. Before we fully get into our episode, I want to start us off with some recent and relevant data that has been collected by the American Jewish Committee, or the AJC. According to the AJC's 2023 State of Anti-Semitism report, nearly 4 in 10 American Jews changed their behavior last year out of fear of anti-Semitism. This can be seen as someone hiding their Jewish star, mugging David, or not wearing it at all, or starting to not wear their merchandise or clothes that may have like Hebrew on it per se out of fear because they're afraid that, oh, because I'm wearing this one thing, I'm going to be judged and I'm going to be bullied or I'm going to be targeted because of what I'm wearing because of my faith. This is telling us something extremely crucial. Anti-Semitism is not a relic of the past. It's an active system of oppression that is shaping real lives every single day. To help us understand this better, I'm joined by a few guests with deeply different relationships to Jewish identity, community, and trauma. First, I'll talk a little bit about my experience as a Jewish social work student and Jewish woman in general, navigating these realities from within the field and the world. And then we're also going to be joined by a few other individuals coming from social work backgrounds. First, we will hear from Kiara, who's not Jewish, but she has close Jewish friends and has taken it upon herself to understand anti-Semitism in a greater light. In addition to this, she's also a social work student navigating the complexities of these issues within the field and within advocacy. Then we'll hear from Dana, a licensed clinical social worker and therapist who focuses primarily on EDs and trauma. She's a Jewish clinical consultant where she constantly is fighting anti-Semitism with truth, healing, and resistance. So be open to hearing about it. We're excited to have them all here. Thank you all for being here.
Thanks
And
for having.
to begin, I want to ground us in what we mean by structural anti-Semitism. Kenneth Marcus argues that anti-Semitism operates not just through individual acts of hate, but through systems, culture, political, and institutional, that positions Jews as perpetual outsiders or threats. This isn't just about isolated comments, it's about the structures that enable prejudice to thrive. So I want to start with a broad question for each of you. When you think about anti-Semitism today, what comes to mind, and how do you understand it as something structural, not just interpersonal bias? For me, anti-Semitism shows up in the ways that social institutions either erase or flatten Jewish identity. Whether it's in undergrad or grad school, Judaism is almost never framed as a marginalized identity, even though anti-Semitism is one of the oldest forms of oppression. The only opportunities I've gotten to hear about Judaism being or Jewish people being oppressed is in my Holocaust class I took in undergraduate school, in my undergrad experience, or I've heard that being talked about in like Jewish culture or like Hebrew classes like that's with that are offered by other schools, especially in undergrad or high school. Structurally, this is the way hate crimes targeting Jews are underreported or how Jewish needs are often excluded from DEI conversations. It's like the system doesn't see us, even when harm is directly happening to us.
When I think of anti-Semitism, what comes to mind is people being afraid to showcase their religion and their culture because of an external pressure that they're experiencing from society or people within their community members that makes them feel like they're not safe to show that. That could be something tangible as like, physical posters or social media or people saying things that might go against like the Jewish faith or Israelites in general, outwardly expressing frustration, disgust, or just general distaste for Jewish people. And that can be subtle or it can be very loud. It can be something as simple as insulting yeah, a cultural tradition accidentally like, oh, Hanukkah, what's that? Like, why can't you just have one day? Or, so passive aggressive comments. It can be microaggressions. It ranges from anything as simple as a passive comment that might be taken out of context or misinterpreted, to something as loud as like, I hate Jewish people.
Anti-Semitism today, like I think there's three. So Sharansky, I think that's how it says, but he does like the three Ds, and ways that it's like shown up that I've seen it. It's like a demonization. It's like I've had other clinicians like tell me that like Jews coin trauma, as if intergenerational Jewish pain is invented or manipulative. It's a double standard. So, like myself and other Jewish clinicians were literally put on a do not refer to Zionist list. Nobody else is asked to strip away their ancestral belonging to be seen as safe or like safe as a clinician. Um, and then like the third D is delegitimization, when Israel's existence gets treated as inherently immoral, as if peoplehood itself is wrong. Um, I think it's like small moments too. Like I reached out to my graduate school to offer training. I might have like shared this with you. I forget like earlier, but I reached out to my graduate school to offer like training on anti-Semitism and like supporting Jewish students. And they got back to me. And like we had a meeting and I met with the assistant dean. They told me they'd get back to me, but then they never did, which was hurtful and upsetting. And also was a way that anti-Semitism was shown. I feel like if I like reach out about like supporting another marginalized identity, I believe that that would have looked different. So for me, like it's definitely structural. It's about like conditions that tell Jews or our identity is either irrelevant or dangerous or something we need to dilute to belong, or like if we think a certain way that will be like, oh, okay, like, if you think like this, then like, you can into this. Um, and I mean, anti-Semitism, it's just like this, it's like recycled. It's like the same blood libels like being used. Like, I guess that's like that second question, but like, does that make sense for this
Yeah.
first one?
Yeah.
Uh,
That's
this
that's
for
awful that
Yeah.
you were put on a list to like not be referred to
Yeah,
and that
I don't
thing with
know
your
if
school. Continuing with those thoughts, I'd like to talk a little bit about and ask you some questions about the historical roots and contemporary manifestations that anti-Semitism has been playing in our world and within the field of social work, within just work and workforce in general. Um, so scholars like Leonard Dinerstein remind us that anti-Semitism is cyclical. It evolves but never disappears. It shapeshifts. Many of today's narratives, such as dual loyalty, Jewish power, Jews as scapegoats, mirror rhetoric from the Middle Ages or the earliest century. And this also can be noted. There's a video I saw the other day that's posted by We Are Tove, and it was entirely showing the cycle of and the shape-shifting of anti-Semitism over the years to its current form. And they're connecting anti-Zionism to anti-Semitism. And a lot of people, and they have their own opinions, um, think that anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism are two different things entirely, but in the reality, they are very similar. Anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism because once you're saying one thing like and putting down the country that's our homeland as Jews, then so once you're like contradicting the Jewish homeland and all of that, then you're also in turn contradicting the Jewish people. So if people don't realize that, I mean, they're open to have their own opinions, obviously, it is freedom of speech, but people have to start realizing that it's just continual rhetoric from the Middle Ages and early 20th century just playing out into a more broad or like nuanced way now in the current century that we live in. So with that, keeping that in mind, my next question for you is, how do you see these old narratives that I spoke about reemerging in present day spaces? Personally, I see a lot of these old narratives reemerging in present day spaces such as academic settings, because there's an assumption that Jews are universally privileged, which entirely erases the reality that Jews have historically been pushed out of institutions, barred from professions, and targeted by the state. These things directly impact Jewish students who suddenly are treated as political symbols instead of people. Another thing is scapegoating. Historically, Jews were blamed for plagues, economic collapses, and anything going wrong. Today, I see the exact same thing, people blaming Jews for capitalism, inequality, and political instability. It's Dinerstein's point exactly. Same patterns, just new packaging. It just doesn't stop.
Mm, that's a hard one. I feel like a lot of people now are kind of using Zionists as like a red flag term, as like a keynote word that they're using to kind of just label people who are from Israel or people who have love or care for their homeland. And I feel like it's kind of become like this nasty word of like an extremist almost. And to be frank, there are extremists. There are people out there who are kind of inciting violence, and there's that on both ends of the spectrum as well. Like there's people who are Zionists that are extreme, and there's people who aren't, who think that the other people are extremists or who act and do things in an extreme way to make those people feel uncomfortable. I definitely feel like the word Zionism itself and what a Zionist represents has been skewed a lot, especially now, given everything that's been going on and how, Israel's been in the limelight with the whole Palestine conflict, which people don't understand that's been going on for centuries. Um, but I feel like people have kind of turned that into like a dirty thing or a bad thing, a negative thing. And I see often on social media, like I saw it the other day, Jennifer Goodwin, a very popular actress, she had made a post about her love and how she's a Zionist apparently, and somebody posted on TikTok that like, oh, you're gonna go see the Zootopia 2 movie, but don't forget the main actress is an open Zionist and, hates Palestinian people. And I was like, that's not even true. Like, never mind the fact that she's a Zionist. Why is that a bad thing? Like, that doesn't mean that she's out here saying Palestine's awful. She never said anything like that. She just has a genuine love and care for Israel and Jewish people. So I don't know why that's kind of become a thing. I mean, maybe as a kind of weapon to use against people, another form of anti-Semitism, because, it keeps changing and shifting over time, as you've said. But I definitely feel like the word Zionism and Zionist has changed a lot to become a weapon and a bad thing.
Yeah, I agree with that entirely. It's very difficult for like even just Jews to talk about like their faith or religion without being constantly attacked like, "Oh, you're Jewish? Oh, you do this, you believe this, you're a killer." That's like the entire thing that we're struggling with right now. It's like that inner conflict now where like, "Oh, should we just not say anything?" But then it's like then that's not doing anything good either. Because it's like standing up for ourselves is standing up for our people, standing up for our homeland. So without doing that, like what does that leave us with? Like, you know?
Um, so then like the second question, yeah, it's definitely like old narratives, like, so like how like anti-Semitism like existed in like Middle Ages and blood libels instead of like just it's like but it's like very like Jewish power oriented, like instead of like us like drinking children's blood, poisoning wells, it's like poisoning institutions or conversations. Instead of blaming Jews for plagues, it becomes like blaming Jews for geopolitical conflict. Like Jews are all in the thing that's like being like really like reemerged as like present days. Like Jews are like, to blame for the world problems, like very like just like how it was in like World War II. The core logic of like behind it is the same. It's just like the vocabulary is a little different. Like now it's like, oh, like when people say like, oh, Zionism isn't anti-Semitism, like people who aren't even Jewish, even though there are some Jews, token Jews, that they choose to like interview. Like I didn't say this before, but I do feel like I like had said to my grad school, hey, like I like kind of about that. I said like, yeah, there specific Jewish groups. Like they literally had no idea. It's like they had no idea what I was even talking about. And like, but they never got back to me. Like they did not care. Like that's was anti-Semitic to me. They basically like, I hear your pain. I know there are Jewish students hurting. I told them there are Jewish students hurting. I have had Jewish students reach out to me. Um, and they did not care. So that was another way. Oh, something else like about like old narratives. But I think there's a reemergence of like suspicion or exclusion. Like, right, it's kind of like like anti-Zionism, like painting Jews and Israel as like evil and like but also that it's like these ideas like to denounce like it's like you can be in this program like you can care about people right like for social work like social justice is for all people like of any race any ethnicity like right like it's not just like sorry just people of color and also this idea that like Jews can't be people of color but this idea that like like I work in eating disorders like people
Mhm.
matter no matter how much money they have. Like this idea that like people can't be helped, like if they only if they are only below the poverty line, like right, like that. So someone can die of an eating disorder no matter their monetary, how much money they have.
So now let's shift into the field of social work itself. Ian Haney Lopez talks about how coded language shapes social narratives around race and power. I think his analysis is relevant here because social work often relies on binaries, privilege versus oppressed, white versus non-white. That can often flatten the complexity of Jewish identity. So I want to ask each of you, where do you see gaps or failures in how social work addresses anti-Semitism? As far as the gaps and failures of how social work addresses anti-Semitism, I personally can speak from lived experiences. We rarely, if ever, discuss anti-Semitism in the classroom. And like I'll talk about with my guests here later on within this question. Personally, the only time I've ever had it come up is either where I brought it up myself within a class or in my class that was about the Holocaust, my history of the Holocaust class last year that I took in undergrad. But the fact is, it rarely comes up in academia, and that's a huge problem because then it's denying what's factual and what happened. And where does that leave us? Like, where does that leave the world for perception? And also, Jewish trauma, like within this, is not included in most curricula entirely unless it's sought out, or maybe if it's at a Jewish institution. Jewish diversity, like Sephardic, Mizrahi, and Ethiopian Jews, is completely ignored. And when Jewish students bring up these issues, we're often met with defensiveness, and we often put ourselves up there as targets. We're often becoming targets for people to just talk down to or attack, whether it's online in class or wherever it is. We just become a target. In addition to this, within Jewish traumas, not a lot of people know about the complexities of them, such as Shiva, which you have to sit for at least a week. And that can be altered depending on the holidays. As someone who personally lost their dad right before the High Holy Days in 2017, we didn't even get the whole week to sit Shiva. And I didn't even have a social worker in high school at the time. So I couldn't even like fully understand what I was going through grief-wise during school, or have somebody to talk about that would understand what I was going through within the Jewish trauma. It's just when you don't understand the cultural trauma associated with anti-Semitic violence, the lack of training is so obvious and it needs to happen. This training needs to be instilled in social workers and therapists, regardless of what field you go into within social work and like therapy. One of the biggest issues is that social work treats Jewishness as purely religious, not as an ethnocultural identity. And that leaves no room to discuss racialized Jews or the cultural dimensions of anti-Semitism.
Mm. One of the things that we learn about being social workers is that we are also advocates. It's our job to kind of help with getting change done. Well, like there are social workers who focus on treatment, there are social workers who focus on education or other things, but there are social workers who focus on advocacy and getting into the room where change happens, where laws are passed, where different things are put into legislation that help others. And so I feel like there's not enough effort in terms of the, Jewish culture that's happening right now with social workers. There's not really anybody advocating for that. There's not a lot of people saying in the room where it happens, hey, there's something really terrible going on, and there's a lot of hate and pain that is being caused right now and is being felt by this community. What can we do to stop that? And what kind of laws and legislations can we put into place to help these people feel more safe and secure and to stop the people who are making them feel unsafe and insecure? So I definitely feel as social workers, it's our job to help. And when there is a crisis or a call for action, we should be the ones that are answering that call. And I feel like a lot of the Jewish community is making calls, but nobody's picking up. And so, as social workers, we need to be able to realize that there are different spaces that need advocacy. It's not just mental health, it's not just domestic violence, it's not just homelessness, that there are other issues attacking our community that we could be doing a better job of listening and speaking up for.
Yeah, I 100% agree. It's so important to address all these issues and have people that are willing to start those conversations or like go into that work. Like there's social workers out there that deal with Jewish trauma specifically. And I feel like even more now than ever, Jews are finding like if they want to find a therapist, they want to find a Jewish therapist so they don't really have to fully explain their traumas as a Jewish person. Like, is there's just so much to it because you're just like, oh, I don't want to like bore them with my entire story. So if they understand it a little, at least a little bit, it helps tell your, it helps you tell your story in a more safe environment where you feel like, oh, okay, they understand at least somewhat of what I'm going through. Now I can talk about it. But without that, then there's nothing.
Higher programs where students learn about every form of oppression except anti-Semitism, that oppression is structural all by itself. Representation is another problem. Institutions will sometimes say they're including Jewish voices, but they only platform like Jews who reject Zionism when Zionism is treated as the limited litmus test for whether a Jew is acceptable. That's not inclusion, that's identity filtering. Um, yeah, again, I think that if a DEI office would never ask another group to renounce their ancestral homeland or core identity narrative in order to be seen as morally acceptable, why is it asked of Jews? The double standard tells me exactly like where the gaps are. Like everything is like a double standard when it comes to Jews. Like in so many continuing education classes, or sorry, like courses that I've taken, like in DEI, like they can say all people can say like all they want that like Jews are included or no, like never. I've never heard about it. I never heard about anti-Semitism in any DEI
Yeah,
course.
me
Uh,
either.
and I think it's that structural like DEI
Mhm.
programs have really put these, I don't know, it makes it very like, well, you're privileged, you're white, you're oppressor. Like that's the titles of that are being put on Jews. And I think it's like very, again, like it's such a double standard. And it's very hurtful.
Yeah.
This is just more about DEI, but like entire DEI infrastructures admit anti-Semitism as in like a form of oppression. Like it's like not counting Jews. Um, and when harm is not named, it's like it cannot be ethically addressed. So like it's basically like, I mean, time and time again, like just all people like deserve care, all people deserve therapy, right? Like, right. And so yeah, like for people, there are so many different programs, and right, it's like et cetera, et cetera. But um, a lot of the models, like binary frameworks that categorize groups as either privileged or marginalized, I think is cannot hold like Jewish complexity. And I think a lot of the frameworks and this whole like what's the term that people use now? Like, oh, decolonization decolonization therapy. These frameworks like fail to recognize like Jewish identity and diaspora trauma, being in this diaspora, and like expulsion histories and genocide histories, like right. And it's like, and so many Jews, like I wrote a post the other day, but like so many Jews, like IFS, EMDR, like so many types of modalities, like Jews did that. And
Hmm.
like this idea that like to decolonize all these white people. Like that's not what that is. And it's so, I find it very anti-Semitic. I find it Jew hatred. I
Yeah.
also would even say, I even find when people question anti-Semitism by using like, oh, well, all these people are Semitic, right? Like taking anti-Semitism and using it against it. So a lot of times I'll even use the word Jew hatred because it's like that by saying anti-Semitism, it is only for quote unquote Semitic people, like, no, that's not what that term was created. Anti-Semitism was created by a Nazi.
Hmm.
So he was not making it about other people. I feel like there was like gatekeeping, like this idea of gatekeeping. I see it. I mean, I don't get I get different type my business is doing fine, but I don't get the same type of referrals that I used to.
Yeah.
It's like they're different now. But I think it is, but again, I don't know. I'm not saying it's specific list or speaking out, but it's a change. There's also institutional like silence when I offer like support Jewish students, like I said, from institutions. It's like when Jewish existence is treated as like ethically problematic until it has been it's basically like a mainstream identity markers that structural bias.
So now let's shift into since you also are a social work student and a social worker. We're just talking about ways that we can do better as social workers and as advocates as well. With all of these issues within anti-Semitism that we see in our world, it's so important to work towards imagining something better. If structural anti-Semitism exists, then structural solutions must also be possible. So the question I want to pose is, if you
Mhm.
could design one intervention that would make social work or even the world more liberatory, equitable, and responsive to anti-Semitism, what would it be? When it comes to an intervention regarding anti-Semitism, I directly think of education and programs and support groups. These things are so important, especially for Jewish and non-Jewish students, because having non-Jewish students understand the complexities of what we're going through, whether it's grief, whether it's trauma. It's important to have other people understand that are outside of our circle because without that, there's nothing. As I keep saying, as it's a repetitive thing that keeps coming up in the world. People have a lack of understanding and education about what we're going through, so they judge us.
That's definitely a hard one because it's not like there's like a law you can put into place that's like you can't be anti-Semitic. Because if we could, we would have done that a
Oh
long
yeah,
time ago.
that would have
And
been
I
that would be
like,
such a great law.
right? That so
Solve a
many
lot of
problems can be
problems.
solved
Yeah.
because it's hard. You can't like just, it's hearsay sometimes. You could be like, oh, this person said they hate Jews, but there's no proof. So like, how could you really enforce that? But I feel like if we can't do that, then we should make it about education. We should make it about having people understand what it means to be a Zionist and what Zionism really means. We should be having mixers and cultural events where they can come and see for themselves what the Jewish culture is all about, what Israel is like, and, more opportunities for people to understand. Because at the end of the day, where it comes from is a lack of understanding. People are out here saying, "Oh, Jews run Hollywood," and like they love money and all these, things that they say about Jewish people. It all comes from a lack of education and understanding. So, as social workers, being educators, being people who can help people understand things by teaching them, we should be making more events like that where people can come and see for themselves what it's really like. We should be having people sharing stories. We should be having more World War II survivors, telling the stories of what they lived through, more opportunities for people to see firsthand that these are real people with experiences and lives and stories and histories just like you and me, but it all comes from a place of not understanding and not wanting to understand. So if we make more opportunities for people to do that, I think that that would be a good solution to that.
I think those are great ideas. I mean, without conversation, then nothing's possible.
It's just everything is like a double standard. I think having like real authentic like Jewish representation in their curriculum and like listening and like letting, you know, Jews speak, actually recognizing like time and time again, like you're in grad school, right? Like, why are they not talking about? Why are like, right? Like, it's Jew. This is the most anti. Like my parents, who are my dad is 72 years old. Like, this is the most anti-Semitism he's ever in his life seen. Like, he was born in 1953. I mean, that's crazy. And like, but they're not talking about it in school. Like, right? And so um I think having like interventions that like formal integration of anti-Semitism in their literature, talking about it, like in policy, talking about it. Like, why is it not in policy? Like you have that social work class in policy. Like, why are they not talking about anti-Semitism? Why are they not talking about Jew hatred? And professional standards, like, right, like being told like literally thinking it's okay to like go up to someone and just like say awful things like, oh, you're a baby killer, you know, whatever. Like that's it's Jews are not responsible to speak for saying that each Jewish person is like responsible to speak for Israel. Like again, there's a lot of anti-Semitism happening in social work and they are ignoring it. It's a huge systematic issue, but I do think a small step is putting it in the curriculum, like listening to actual Jewish students, having Jewish speakers come. I know it's a bunch of things, not just one, because I feel like it can't just be one.
So, as we close out our conversation, I want to ask you, what is one thing you hope, and this can apply for social workers or just people in general, what is one thing you hope social workers or people take away from this conversation? I hope that social workers, Jewish and non-Jewish, could take away from this conversation is that anti-Semitism is a living, active structure, not a historical footnote, and that listening to Jewish experiences, especially when they challenge assumptions, is so essential. And not to believe like everything you hear, like all those stereotypes are majorly not true and they're based off of fiction. They're based off of what people think of us before they even talk to a Jewish person or even listen to our traumas.
I hope that people view it as a call to action, that there is a space that needs to be filled, and there are people that need advocacy, need people in the room to speak up for them because not people just want to live their lives. People, have this kind of mentality that frustrates me that, oh, that's just the way it is. I can't really do anything about it. But we need to be doing a better job at as social workers to say, hey, there is something you can do about it, and I am responsible for that. It's my job to go and talk to the policymakers and the legislators who are responsible for writing all of these things. It's my job to go and walk in the room and say, hey, here's an idea. Here's something that we can do to help our community. And so I hope that social workers, when they see this or listen to this podcast, they see that there's an opportunity for real change to be made, and maybe inspire some of us to see that there's a space that you could, belong in, that you could make a real difference in. So I hope that it really sparks inspiration and it also drives people to want to make change and want to help. So, yeah.
So I think what I want Jewish social workers to take from this conversation is to not give up and to keep going and that like they're needed in this space because when we're not a part of spaces, anti-Semitism is like increases even more. And I think that what I want social workers in general to take from this conversation is that um, to listen and give people like the space and hear them and that like Jews trauma counts and that that Jews and hearing and learning about them and not just about from the Holocaust. Like there's so much about our culture and like who we are and like in college and all these spaces. Like I mean there are many people who don't know Jews and I want people to like I think that people should learn about Jews and our trauma and not just the Holocaust because I think sometimes things can disappeared. And it's like, oh, well, if it's not as bad as that, like this, this is the most anti-Semitism we've had to experience since the Holocaust. And it is awful. And that I think there's such a disconnect that people don't
Yeah.
understand. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you to our guests for sharing your insights and your vulnerability. And thank you to our listeners. Understanding anti-Semitism is essential for anyone committed to justice-based social work and work in the world in general. To build a liberatory future, we must confront all forms of oppression, including those our institutions have historically ignored. This is Unseen Lines. Until next time.